my name is Ashley Amos. I am the new planning coordinator with the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. I'm located in Nicholas County and cover the southeastern part of the state. With us tonight is Lauren Weatherford from WVU Extension in Nicholas and Fayette County. She'll be going over canning, freezing, and other preservation techniques. And at the end, I'll go over a few of our business development resources, and then we'll wrap it up with some questions. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Lauren.
All right. Thank you, Ashley. I'm just starting to, sorry, I got some feedback. I was just getting started here. As any of you know who have done some of these live webinars, they're not, we might have a glitch or two along the way, but hopefully most of it will go very smoothly. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming this evening. We have a lot of territory to cover in a short, within an hour, including some question and answers. I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of a preview because we covering canning, both pressure canning and hot water bath canning, as well as freezing, a little bit about drying, and some resources for some other preservation techniques. I normally do just the canning and the freezing in 5 hours. So we have condensed it down. There will be a lot of PowerPoint because there's just really no way for me to be able to cover that much material while demonstrating things, and you can't really can in that short of a period directly. But we will cover as much material as I possibly can. It should be a really good introduction for you. And we're going to provide a lot of resources. And my email and my phone number will be posted twice throughout the presentation. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to write that down. And if you want to contact me, I can send you the copy of the presentation. I can send you other resources. You know, just ask your questions through that after the fact, and I will be happy to go back and help you. So hopefully, I'm sorry. Okay. Hopefully I will be able to give you a good introduction to all these things. So when we go over when we go over the PowerPoint, there will be a couple of videos at the end, which rather than me making videos, there's already some very good videos out there from neighboring extension services and some other resources. I've gone through all the videos. They're very accurate. So we try to that helps us be able to cover a lot more information in this period of time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Ashley, is everybody seeing that okay?
Yep, I can see it on my end.
Okay, all right, great. So just to welcome you again, canning, freezing, and other preservation techniques, just in case somebody's in the wrong webinar. That is what we will be covering here. So the first thing that I want to talk about is I want to address some of the resources that you can work with in terms of looking for help with food preservation information. One thing to know is that there is, and many of you may already know this, there is a ton of recipes and information and personal blogs out there, but there is a lot of inaccurate and not safe information as well. So how do you know what to look for? So there are some resources right here on this page that are a great place to start. The National Center for Home Food Preservation. There we go. This webpage right here, it is hosted by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and University of Georgia. And
hey,
this
Lauren,
yes.
We can't see the webpage.
Oh.
You'll have to share that.
Oh, I got to redo the thing. Yep. Thanks for pointing that out. There we go. Is that better?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, sorry about that. So the National Center for Home Food Preservation, this is kind of our, what I call the holy grail of canning, preserving, fermenting, pickling, drying, all these things. If you want to know what is the best information, how to properly do it, this is where we go. They put out a book as well as some DVDs called So Easy to Preserve. But we used to have this book in the most updated edition of this book in our extension offices. And then we don't need to have the book anymore because literally the entire set of information is here on the website. This is where we get all of our information. When I get questions that I don't automatically know, I go here. So we're going to start a little bit. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just want to kind of give you some ideas of what is here. So not only do you have direct information about canning, freezing, drying, etc., but you have other information. So you can look in, if you're not in West Virginia or you move. Sorry, don't know. There, I had something pop up. But there's information you can find out from all different states throughout the country. And a lot of the information, you'll see the resources I use are other extension services because they do much of the same thing in their local areas as we do. So let's take a look at canning for a second. So they have separate areas on hot water boiling, hot water baths, or pressure canning, general information, and then you can see under each of those links there's a ton of information even further than that. I have found this site very easy to get through. Usually within 2 or 3 clicks you can get to where you want to go, but you know, they just have a lot of different information. It's just straight black and white text a lot of times, but it's what you need that is there. You can print things off. This is really the best place to start. So I'm going to go, the next place is a lot of the other cooperative extension services. I picked this one from the University of Maine. We're going to look at, they have just this series of how-to videos. Ohio State also has some videos. Penn State has videos and a lot of documents as well. So you can kind of see that a lot of the different states have some great information. The other place that you can go and know that you're getting information is websites from places that are a brand name that you are aware of. For instance, Ball or Kerr, they provide canning supplies. So they're going to provide you with a lot of great information and accurate information, safe information. So you can kind of, and Ball is the one who does the Ball Blue Book, and that's kind of a $10 book you can find in most Walmarts. Amazon has it. Most outfits, that's kind of a nice basic introduction to canning. And go down here, kind of, you can see Canning 101, Canning Guides, Jams and Jellies. You can just see there's a lot of really great information there. So those are all places. What I don't recommend is that you go to Pinterest and just find anything that anybody says, or magazines or sites that you're just not sure where that information is. Mother Earth has a lot of really neat stuff, but they also have a lot of really inaccurate canning information out there. YouTube, unless it's from like a university site or somebody, you know, like Ball or Kerr or Presto who makes canners, I wouldn't necessarily trust the information. So just wanted to kind of give everybody an idea of what to look for there. I'm switching back to the PowerPoint. All right. And if anybody has any questions, you can write it in the chat and Ashley will kind of help make sure. Oh, there is one more place I wanted to show you. Sorry, I'm going to flip back for just a minute. And these are some other websites that I just listed. If you go to the WVU Extension website today, the very first thing that you'll find on the main page is a Learn to Preserve Food webinar series. So they have a series, unfortunately the first webinar, but I believe they're going to be posted. I don't know where yet, but the first webinar was Monday, and I think they have about 5 or 6 different sessions that different extension agents are doing, and
is now exiting.
To register and join those webinars if you want a more detailed presentation. And that would just Google WVU Extension Service and you'll go right to that main page. All right, so lots of ideas for where you can go for good quality information. Now, some of the things we're going to go over here, we're going to cover canning. That's going to be primarily what we're going to discuss. We're going to talk about some safety issues. We're going to talk about pressure canning and hot water bath canning. Then we're going to move into a brief overview of freezing. And we're going to talk a little bit about drying. And then for other resources for pickling, fermenting, curing, and smoking, you need to refer back to things like the Center for Home Food Preservation and some of the other extension sites that I've talked about. So let's start first with home canning. Canning safety. This is something I always hear, especially when we're working with pressure canners. People are always concerned they're going to explode their pressure canner. This is technically a pressure cooker in this picture, but I think it gets the point across. And hopefully, if you learn how to do it properly, it's pretty easy. There's some basic things you need to make sure you take care of, but in terms of avoiding the pressure canners exploding, you just need to kind of use some common sense and follow some basic rules, and it's really works quite easily. And modern day canners also have lots of indicators as to what's happening, so we can avoid anything like that. I want to talk a little bit about why it's important to follow some of these things about canning safety. I've got a couple of pictures here that remind us of things that we used to do. In the 1930s, doctors had put out there that kids needed a lot more fresh air, and these are literally baby cages that used to hang out of windows, even in high-rise buildings. Thank goodness we don't do that anymore. Smoking, there's an ad there for how gentle the Philip Morris cigarettes were when you were caring for your newborn baby. Godfrey's cordial, this is one of my favorites. This was known as Mama's Little Helper to help the kids rest and go to sleep. Many of you may be aware that there was originally cocaine in Coca-Cola, which is where the name comes from, and that heroin was an ingredient in common cough syrup. So we don't do those things either. A little more recently, don't think many of you could consider just throwing kids in the back of the truck and driving around town or up and down the highway. That would be something I think the police would actually stop you and pull you over, especially those little kids, because now they need to be in seat belts and booster seats and car seats and all those kinds of things. And then this is one of my personal favorites, lawn darts, metal tip things that you throw directly at each other. I don't know, most of us managed to survive. Maybe we should bring them back. Maybe we should be a little tougher, or they actually don't make them like this anymore. So they put rounded edges on them. You can buy them, but they're not the same. So why do you have to can? Why can't you just heat the food up and put it in the jars? Because the jars will pop if you heat them up. It's not the processing and the safety of the food that makes the jars pop. What makes the jars pop is just the heating and then the cooling, and that seals those lids down into the jars. But to process the food, to cook it for long enough at a high enough temperature, you need to be able to do that in order to ensure that bacteria, yeast, molds have been removed from the surfaces. Things like washing before you put them in, that really only takes care of it just a little bit, but they have carefully researched and tested and measured whether the bacteria and the things are still in the foods, after you do these recipes the way they're supposed to be done, and then you can feel safe about leaving your canned goods out on the shelf. So it's really important that you actually process. Just putting foods into a jar and sealing the lid without the processing, it's the same as putting it in a Ziploc bag or into a Tupperware type container. So you need to make sure that you're really following that processing step. That's what canning's really all about. So I have a little top 10 list of canning safety issues, and these are also just some tips for things. Use good jars and lids. So you want to make sure that you use a jar that's approved for canning. Ball or Mason, those are well-known names. There are some others that Walmart has some of its own brands, but if it is designed for canning, then it is an acceptable jar. Using something like an old mayonnaise jar that may actually still fit the same canning lids, I understand the need to kind of not want to throw those things out and save some money, but things like mayonnaise jars are not intended for canning. They're not intended to have that pressure put on them, and a lot of times they have seams, and those seams are weak, and usually the glass is thinner, they have seams, they can easily break when put under pressure. So you want to make sure only to use canning approved jars. They do recommend that you do new flats for the lids. You can use old rings, but you want to make sure that the rings aren't dented or too rusty. Watermarks are one thing, rust is another thing. That rust can travel to the flats and then get inside the jar. So rings can be reused, but you want to make sure they're in pretty good shape. But make sure you always have new flats. The standard rule at this point is if you have a recipe older than 1996, you shouldn't use that recipe unless you have checked and it is the same as a more modern recipe. So again, knowing that you can kind of go to places like the Center for Home Food Preservation and find recipes for almost everything you can think of, then it's okay. You can go ahead and, use that newer recipe and know that it has been tested, tried and true, and that it's going to be safe. Jam and jelly recipes, you can go with them a little older. The only thing about jams and jellies, I used to get jams and jellies from my great aunt every year without fail, and she always put wax on the top. Please do not put wax on the top of your jams and jellies. That actually holds the mold into the food. So you just want to make sure you don't put any wax on there. That's one of those older things. So using the right canner for the job. I'm going to pause the presentation here and go live for just a minute. Ashley, can you see me okay?
Yep, you're clear.
Okay, thanks. All right, so I have two canners here. This is a hot water bath canner. It's just basically a big pot. So it doesn't have any pressure. It's just a lid on a pot. I could use it for making other things. Crab boils, we use it for in my house. The piece that you want about your hot water bath is you want a rack. One, because it makes it very easy. This is a way that I store jars that I haven't used. I want to reuse year after year, so I put them in there and they're good and safe and protected. But it also, when you are using them, this rack allows you to pick things up. So you can pick up all the jars. Also, that rack separates the jars from the bottom of the pot. So when they're cooking and they jostle around a little bit when the water's boiling, you're not chipping the glass by having it bang against the bottom of the pot all the time. Those racks are really very important. You can buy replacement racks. They're not very expensive. Walmart, places like that have them. Sometimes your local hardware store, Southern States, places that sell canning supplies often have those racks. And they do wear out over time as well. So this afternoon, I canned some green beans. Believe it or not, I found green beans in the grocery store. I wasn't even sure I would, but I canned some green beans this afternoon. This is a very large canner, but this is a pressure canner. It also has a rack inside. And you do actually want that rack as well for the same reason, so that when the jars are in there, they don't shake and chip and weaken the glass. So if you get an old pressure canner from a family member or yard sale, that's perfectly fine. But just if it doesn't come with a rack, you want to make sure you get a rack and put it in there. And it's just a little plate with a little space to the bottom, sits right inside there. A couple things you want to know about parts of a pressure canner. I'm going to come closer with the lid here. So this is a gauge canner, and this will actually tell me as the pressure rises exactly where I am. If you have a weighted canner, or what we call a jiggler sometimes, instead of a pressure gauge that gives you the individual numbers, there will be a weight that says usually 5, 10, and 15. Those are also perfectly safe and acceptable to use. So if you have one of those, don't feel like you need to change it. It's perfectly safe and good. So the gauge, one thing to know about these is these need to be checked annually. Your local extension office should have a tester where we can take these, we put them on, we check the pressure, and then we measure to make sure that the gauge is still properly calibrated, so that when you're looking at 10 pounds of pressure, it actually is 10 pounds of pressure. So it is recommended that those are tested once a year. All you have to do is take just the lid. We don't need the pot. You can call ahead, especially in these times. Not all the offices are open yet. So you might want to call ahead to your local extension office and have them see what they want to do in terms of getting your lid tested. And it's just the lid. So a couple of other pieces about these modern canners, the pressure canners. This is called the petcock. And when they talk about venting and then sealing the vent, this is just a weighted thing that goes over that vent right here. And then this actually stops the venting from happening and seals it off. Once you're done canning and your pressure has dropped down to 0, then you can take this off, vent the rest of the pressure off, and then you'll be ready. You'll be ready to open it. My canner lid actually has not only the gauge that tells me if there's pressure building, the vent, which will whistle steam like a train engine, telling me the pressure's building, but this is a stopper that will pop once it gets to a certain amount of pressure. And then here in back, I think it always looks like one of those little buttons on a turkey. So this will pop up when it starts to build pressure. So you will see the vent go, this one pop, and this one pop before any pressure ever registers on the gauge. So you can see that there's lots of ways for you to kind of know it's building pressure. One other thing about the lid, on a pressure canner, you should have a rubber ring inside your lid. You want to check that every year when you first get it out and make sure it's not dry and cracked. It needs to be pliable and soft and moving and allow you, that means that you're still going to be able to seal that lid really well. And then a lot of times they just have arrows, make them pretty. You don't have to have any kind of special locks. They just slide on and lock into place, and then you're good to go. So if you get one from a yard sale or a hand-me-down from a family member or friend, a couple things you just want to look for. As long as it seals properly, it's probably fine. You don't want any warping, and you need to make sure that that lid shuts okay. If it doesn't go on or you have to fight with it really hard, that means it's probably been overheated at some point. The metal has warped, and it's probably not safe. I think I've been with Extension for 15 years now, and I've seen one bad canner in all those times. Every other canner that anybody's brought to me has been perfectly safe. So know that those hand-me-downs are a really great bargain. So I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint for just a moment. So how do we know which foods that we're supposed to use in which canner? And knowing that there's also a little bit of debate about that, we're going to kind of cover this in a couple of different ways before we're done. But a hot water bath is for things that have a high acidity level. Jams and jellies, relishes, pickles, high acid fruits like apples and peaches. Those are all things that you can do in a hot water bath. Tomatoes can actually be done. They are technically a fruit, and they can be done in a hot water bath. But you do want to add just a little bit of lemon juice or citric acid, and the recipes will tell you how much, to each of the jars. And that just makes sure. So tomatoes, because there's kind of this mix where they're kind of treated as a vegetable, and they do have a high acidity level, but not quite as much as we would want to guarantee. So the way I think about it is tomatoes sit on the fence. Figs and prunes, I believe, are also items that are kind of on the fence, and they need just a little bit of citric acid or lemon juice to help make sure that they've got the proper amount of acid in there to keep them safe in a hot water bath. So those things can all be done by just boiling them, and making sure that you don't have to worry about that whole pressure building. When do you need a pressure canner? Well, for everything that has a lower pH than 4.6, and that includes pretty much every vegetable, meats, soups, and combination tomato products like sauce and salsa. So reason that sauces and salsas need to be pressure canned is because they're combination foods. When you put peppers and onions and different items in those things, it lowers the pH level, and then it doesn't maintain that kind of right at the edge level anymore. So it needs to be pressure canned to ensure its safety. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to take a little break from our top 10 list. This is something in West Virginia I get a lot of questions about. How do we properly can our wieners and our peppers? And the answer is you can't, because hot dogs just cannot be tested for accuracy to make sure that they are safe all the way through, and they lower the pH balance, and then there's a different fat content which changes the recipe. In fact, I called the University of Georgia because I'd gotten this question so many times about how do I safely do my hot dogs and my peppers. And the University of Georgia basically said, you want to do what? But because the hot dogs are such a processed food already, and they have so many different ingredients in there, there's no way to guarantee that they could be safe when cooked and processed in a jar. So my recommendation to people are process your peppers in your tomato sauce. That's perfectly okay. There are recipes for that. And just add your hot dogs after the fact. So go ahead and process your hot peppers in your tomato sauce and add your hot dogs in at the end. And you can still have them. Just don't put those hot dogs down into the jars, because that's not safe. Now, here's your next debatable issue that some people know about. Yes, you do have to pressure can your green beans. A lot of people don't. I often hear that my granny, she had 14 kids and she water bathed her green beans, and 300 members in my family are all safe and nobody's ever gotten sick. I understand that. Botulism is what we're really concerned about here. It is rare, but it does exist, and it can be deadly. And it can affect somebody within 48 to 72 hours. So my question is if you don't pressure can, and at Thanksgiving dinner you drag out your canned green beans that you did, and Granny's at the table and the new toddlers at the table, are you sure that there's no botulism in there? Are you willing to take that gamble? Because that is a risk you're taking. Chances are they'll be okay, but what if they're not? So in order to ensure that they are okay, you need to properly pressure can your green beans. Here is why. Boiling temperatures can only get to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. In order to kill botulism, USDA says you need to be at a minimum of 240 degrees for an extended period of time. You can achieve that in a pressure canner. You absolutely cannot get higher than 212 degrees in a hot water bath. So that is why. And just so you know, if you say, well, I've opened my green beans, they don't smell like anything, they look good. It's odorless, colorless. It has no way of detecting it. It's a microorganism. You will not know when you open that jar. There's no mold. There's nothing that you can see or smell or sense that would tell you that that botulism is there. Botulism loves warm, sealed environments. So canning is the perfect place for them. But we need to just make sure we kill it, and then we should be safe. All right, so off of the good news, back to the better news. We talked about the dial gauge, have it checked annually. You can call your local WVU Extension office. Check the gasket. We talked about that one. This is another thing. There's kind of a misconception that you can put your cruddy food into a can and it will be fine. That comes from the fact that you can use tougher cuts of meat and can them, and they will come out more tender. And that's because the canning process actually tenderizes the meat. But if you put unripened fruits or vegetables or things that are bruised and over the top, you're not going to get the best quality out of your canning. So you want to get things that are the ripest. They don't have to be pretty, but they do need to be the best quality. So the better quality you put in, the better quality you're going to get out of your foods when you open that jar up later. Number 7, make sure everything is clean before you start. Clean counters, clean equipment, clean food, and make sure you wash your hands. In this day and age, I think that's something we're all very aware of, and we make sure that we clean things on our pretty diligently. Follow number 8. Follow the approved recipes to the letter. You can't add a little bit of sugar or a little bit of salt or a little bit of fat. Fat can actually really mess up the seal. You have to do it exactly as it's identified in the recipe. Don't change anything. Don't change any amounts of any ingredients. It needs to be the same. If it's not the same, it's no longer a safe and tested recipe. Processing times. Boy, this is a tough one. What about those processing times? I don't want to sit and watch my tomatoes for 45 minutes. Well, 45 minutes is the amount of time it takes to make sure that that item is safe. You have to slowly bring up pressure canners. I did the green beans. It probably took half hour to 45 minutes to bring it up to pressure, 25 minutes for processing time at pressure, and then probably over an hour and a half for it to naturally depressurize, which is how you want to do it, which is part of number 10. So you want to make sure that you allow those pressure. You can't rush it. I know that's tough and you get tired and you just want to move it along, but this is one of those things you need to get a good book or watch something on your computer or your television while you're in the kitchen, because you can't leave the room. That's where those accidents happen. That's something else I need to mention. That picture with the exploding pressure cooker, a lot of times what happens is that those pressure canners are not attended to. When you are using a pressure canner, you need to be there to constantly adjust the temperature of and make sure the pressure is being maintained. So even today, when I was doing my green beans, it called for 12 pounds of pressure. Well, in order to maintain 12 pounds of pressure, every couple of minutes, I had to turn the burner back up and then turn it back down, because it would go a little bit above and a little bit below. And I probably say between every 5 to 10 minutes, I was adjusting that canner to maintain that 12 pounds of pressure. You cannot turn it on and walk away. One of my favorite stories was I had somebody call me and say, could you possibly tell me why my husband has now blown up 3 pressure canners? And I said, well, tell me what he's doing and I'll see what I can guess. And she said, well, every year he goes out to can. He cans outside on an open burner and then he goes and chops wood. And every time the canner blows up. Well, the reason is because while he was chopping wood, he was not watching his canner, and it overpressurized and it couldn't maintain that pressure anymore until it exploded. Actually, it can be super dangerous. So please make sure that when you are pressure canning, that you are very attentive and in the area where your pressure canner is. You can have somebody else check for you, but you have to have somebody looking at that gauge or checking those jigglers to make sure you're at pressure. Lastly, this is another one of those hurry up kind of things. When you remove your jars from the canner, you need to let them cool naturally, right side up, for a minimum of 12 hours, and do not move them. So you want to take them out. You want to put them on a towel so they don't bang against, especially our more modern countertops are very, very hard. And you want to make sure you have a towel to cushion that heat. And then you set them up, and you can put them on surfaces all over your house, but they need to go in one place and stay there for 12 to 24 hours, not moving them, not putting them around. There's kind of an old thing about turning your jars upside down. You don't want to do that. Just leave them right where they are, and make sure that you let them cool down to where they need to be, and then you can store them and move them as you need. All right, so we finished our top 10 list. I'm not going to talk forever. There are some videos coming up. So a couple of additional tips. So I mentioned the thing about the fellow who was chopping wood. But canning outdoors is unsafe. Here's why. You cannot maintain constant temperature in an outdoor setting. Most outdoor burners are not regulated as to the temperature, so they adjust up and down. If the wind blows, you may not get a consistent heat source. In order to kind of have a more controlled environment, you really need to be indoors. So I do not recommend outdoor canning at all. You do not, a lot of people think that you have to sterilize your jars. You don't. You just need to wash them. You can load them in a dishwasher, you can hand wash them, whatever you want to do, but the jars themselves do not need to be sterilized. The food that you're putting in them is not sterilized food, so it won't do you any good to sterilize them. A good washing, just like the rest of your dishes, will be just fine. You do need, however, to sterilize the flats of the lids. And that helps make sure that that seal is properly done. And it makes sure that the rubberized part is not holding any bacteria as well. So just the flats do need to be boiled for a minimum of 5 minutes. Always open the pressure lid away from you when you are ready to open it. That makes sure the steam doesn't come up in your face. And here's something specific to West Virginia. Many recipes will talk about the importance of altitude. At lower altitudes, things will process faster. At higher altitudes, things will process slower. So at Huntington is less than 1,000 feet. They will have one set of times. Fayetteville, West Virginia is 1,818 feet above sea level. That's in the middle, and they'll have one set of times. And then between 2,000 to 4,000 feet above sea level, which a lot of our eastern side of the state is above 2,000 feet, then that's a different set of times. So in West Virginia, this is actually something that really does apply. So please check your recipes and make sure that you're doing it for the proper amount of time according to your altitude. All right. Couple of things about equipment. This is a set of canning. This is one of those things where you want to have the right tools for the job. Just because we're not doing construction doesn't mean we still don't need the right tools. That thing that looks like an X up there, that's a jar holder. It's actually upside down. People get confused as to how you want to put your hands on the black part, and the rounded parts go around the neck of the jar and allow you to pick up hot jars. You can see the picture there on the box is better. Then you have a funnel to go into your jars. Another jar holder, that thing with kind of the long handle and the open spot at the end, that's another jar holder. That thing that kind of has a little stair step edge to it, that is a headspace measuring tool. Headspace is something you want to make sure. That's the amount of space you have between the top of the food and the lid. So in each recipe will have an amount that you need to make sure you keep at the headspace. And the headspace is something you need to make sure is very accurate, because that can affect the seal of your jar. The other thing you can use that tool for right there is it is a plastic tool, so you can get bubbles out of your jams and jellies by using that. Just don't use metal. And then the last thing there on the left, that is a magnetic pickup tool, so that when you're sterilizing your flats, that you can take them out of the pot where you sterilized them and then put them directly onto the jars without touching them and or burning your hands. All right. So now we are going to watch a little video that kind of covers a lot about the canning process, and hopefully in a slightly more entertaining way than just me talking to you. So I've got to go back and check because I've got to set the audio to make sure you can hear it. And we're going to watch this little video, give you a change of pace.
The steam in a pressure canner circulates around the jars, transferring heat into the liquid and food inside the jars.
Yeah, I need to back
Put the
up.
rack on the bottom of the canner. Never let the jars touch the bottom of the canner. Add 2 to 3 inches of water and bring to a simmer, or 180 degrees Fahrenheit for hot pack foods, or to 140 degrees Fahrenheit for raw pack foods. After each jar is filled and its ring adjusted, use a jar lifter to place it onto the canning rack. Keep jars upright at all times. Space the jars evenly around the canner. Lock the lid securely on the canner. Leave the weight off the vent pipe or open the petcock. Turn the heat to high until a full funnel of steam flows evenly from the vent pipe. Let the steam exhaust from the canner for 10 minutes. Place the weight on the vent pipe or close the petcock. The canner should pressurize in 3 to 5 minutes. Start timing the process when the pressure reading on the dial gauge indicates that the recommended pressure has been reached, or when the weighted gauge begins to jiggle or rock steadily. Regulate the heat under the canner to maintain a steady pressure at or slightly above the correct gauge pressure. When the timed process is completed, turn off the heat. Do not open the canner. Let it stand undisturbed. Do not force cool the canner. After the canner is depressurized and has returned to 0 pounds pressure, remove the weight from the vent pipe or open the petcock. Wait 10 minutes. At the end of 10 minutes, unlock the canner lid and remove it carefully. Lift the lid away from you so that the steam does not burn your face.
All right. So here's another one on hot water bath canning.
Canning is one of the best ways to preserve food, save cash, and share some of your special recipes with friends and family. Home canning is easy. We'll show you the method that uses boiling water, called the water bath method, that heats and seals jars. This process works well with high acid content recipes such as jams, jellies, and pickles. Low acid foods such as meat, seafood, dairy products, and unpickled vegetables should not use this canning method. Safety comes first, and you should take no shortcuts with canning. Follow your canning recipe to the letter to ensure you're using the exact combination of acid and heat to safely can using this water bath method. If you have any questions, use reputable online canning resources such as the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has online extension offices for every state. The USDA is staffed by experts who will provide safe canning tips. Another safety tip: use professional equipment such as jars, lids, and screw-on bands or rings that are made specifically for the purpose of canning. You can reuse canning jars and bands if they are undamaged. Lids are designed for one-time use only, so buy new lids each time you can food. So here's what you need to can. A canning recipe. The water bath method is best for canning high-acid fruits and veggies such as berries and tomatoes. A large canning pot in a removable jar rack. If you have an electric stovetop, be sure your canning pot has a flat bottom. An assortment of canning jars, lids, and bands. Another large pot you can use to sterilize jars. A small pot for soaking lids and bands. A tea kettle for boiling extra water. A jar lifter for handling hot jars. A funnel with a wide mouth. An assortment of ladles. A narrow heat-proof rubber or plastic spatula, anything non-metal. Paper towels. Racks or cloth towels for cooling jars. A kitchen timer. First, you need to clean the bands and lids. Wash them in soapy water and rinse in hot water. Toss away any nicked or chipped pieces. Wash the jars and then sterilize them by placing them in boiling water for 10 minutes. Leave the jars immersed in hot water until you're ready to fill them. Soak the new lids in hot but not boiling water for at least 10 minutes to soften the rubber seal. Leave the lids in warm water until you're ready to use them. The clean bands can be room temperature for easy handling. Next, you need to heat the water bath. Fill the canning pot halfway with water and turn on the heat. Hang the jar rack inside the canning pot. Fill the jars using a wide mouth funnel. Ladle your recipe, jam, tomato sauce, and fill the clean, hot jars. Your recipe will tell you how much unfilled headspace to leave at the top. Take the spatula and run it around the inside of the jar to release air bubbles. Use a clean, damp cloth to wipe off food or liquid from the jar's rim and threads. Place a lid on each jar. Ensure that the rubber seal fully contacts the rim. Fit a band over the lid and screw it closed firmly but not tightly. Use the jar lifter to place the jars in the rack. Take care that the jars don't touch each other. Then lower the rack into the hot water. The jars should be submerged under at least 1 to 2 inches of water, or follow the directions of your recipe. Add more hot water from your kettle if you need to. Turn up the heat to high to bring the water to a boil. As soon as the water starts boiling vigorously, start your timer. Place the lid on the pot, turn down the heat, and allow the jars to simmer at a gentle boil for the time specified by your recipe. When the time is up, turn off the heat. Use the jar lifter to take the hot jars out of the water. Stand the jars on a rack or towel, leaving some room between them. Let them cool to room temperature. As they cool, you'll hear a little ping as the lids sink down in the center. This is the exact sound you want to hear. It means the jar has vacuum sealed for safe storage. After the jars are cooled, and this can take 12 to 24 hours, check each seal by unscrewing the bands and pressing down in the center of the lid. If you don't feel it give, the lid is properly sealed. If the lid springs back up, the jar did not seal. This is okay though. You can use this jar right away. Just place it in the fridge and eat it within 2 weeks. Then just label and date your jars so you can keep track of all your canned food. And store the jars in a cool, dry place out of direct sunlight. Your canned food should keep for at least a year. If you open a jar and it looks or smells different from what it should be, or if the seal is broken, throw it away. The simple basics of water bath canning allow you to capture and can the flavors of summer. What a treat it is to savor the summer's bounty long after the growing season has passed.
All right, well, that kind of covered both pressure canning and hot water bath. Sorry about the interruption again. We're getting close to the 1 hour mark, and I'm sorry, there's just, as you can see, there's a lot we covered. We're pretty much done with canning. We're going to move on to freezing and a short video on the basics of drying, all just a couple of minutes long. So if you all will bear with me for a few more minutes, if you have to go, I perfectly understand, but I will be happy to stay and answer questions after. But I'd like to try to make sure we cover all the topics for those who are able to stay. There we go. So let's talk about freezing just a little bit. Freezing, it's pretty basic, right? You can just kind of throw things in the freezer and freeze them. Well, a couple of things. Water can really mess up, especially your fruits and things when you can them or when you freeze them. So if you want your fruits and vegetables to look a lot like they do when you get them out of the bags at the store, the first thing you want to do is wash them, and then you want to dry them off. You may dry them with a paper towel. I kind of let mine air dry a little bit. Especially with those fruits, the more water you have, they break down the skins and they'll really make them more of that mushy texture. The less water, the less of that soft, mushy texture. You want to ensure that your freezer temp, you want a freezer thermometer. Make sure your temperature in your freezer stays about 0. That is the optimal temperature for freezing fruits and vegetables. Blanching, which means to briefly boil or steam and then plunge into ice water. So you're going to cook it for a couple minutes, and then you're going to put it into some cold or ice water to stop the cooking process. That process, what it does is it brings the enzymes. Enzymes are the things that ripen the fruits and vegetables to the surface, and it gives them color, texture, and more flavor. So you want to make sure with your vegetables that you do blanch them. Lots of the websites we talked about gives blanching times. I often do it, for instance, when you cook corn, you're really blanching the corn. You're just not then putting it into the ice water bath, but you put it in the hot water, you watch till it kind of turns that bright yellow color, and then you know it's done and you take it out. That is the first half of blanching. Then you would just stick it in some ice water. Tray freezing is what I recommend, and tray freezing allows for those individual pieces. So I'm going to stop the PowerPoint for just a minute and show you two examples. All right, can you see me okay again, Ashley?
Yep, you're clear.
Okay. I have some things that I froze yesterday, ready to go. So here are some strawberries that I just cut up and threw in a bag and froze. Well, it works for sure. But if you look, you kind of have a big glob of strawberries. That's not really what you're thinking of, or at least not what I'm thinking of when I want to freeze my fruits and vegetables, is a big block of chunky frozen food. What I want is a tray. I've got the plastic wrap on there, but these are some green beans. So I canned some in the pressure canner and I froze some. I blanched them and then I just laid them out on this tray. And then once I've done that, so you put them in the tray, they freeze, they're all individuals. And then I can just take them.
Hey, Lauren, your camera's just a little bit high.
Okay, that's all right. I'm going to bring it up. So then, there we go. So then once I take it off the tray, then you can see, and you've just got a bag full of frozen beans. You can take as much or as little as you want, and they're not stuck together in any way. These, I also did blueberries, are one of my favorite summer things to freeze because nothing makes me happier in the middle of the winter than some hot blueberry pancakes. And I did the same thing. We go and we pick them when they're ripe. These are ones I bought in the store. And then I just lay them on a tray in the freezer. I dry them off, lay them on the tray, and then you can see, and I can just put them in the bag, and they're all going to be individual blueberries. So I'm going to go back to sharing. Make sure I hit that audio button. You want to make sure you use airtight containers, and you want to make sure that you label and date your foods. Freezing storage times are recommended for 6 to 8 months. Now, if you leave them in your freezer, I'm going to come back to something else real quick. But if you leave them in your freezer for longer than 6 to 8 months, it's not that it won't be safe. It's that you will start to deteriorate the food. So they'll start to get things like freezer burn or breakdown, and they just won't be as tasty and helpful anymore. So you want to make sure that you are as enjoyable, and you want to make sure that you use them within 6 to 8 months. Two things from that video. That was not one from an extension service or the University of Georgia. Nothing that they said was really wrong. But they did two things. They did say you needed to sterilize your jars. You don't have to. And the other thing is they said storage for canned products for 1 year. And she said maybe more. That same rule applies. The safest amount of time is for 1 year. Why do we not recommend things for longer when people know perfectly well that they can stay on your shelf for 4 or 5 years, even longer? One, the food will break down because it cannot stay forever. It will eventually start to break down. And again, the quality of the food will not be as good. And two, you greatly increase the chance that those lids are going to come off those jars or pop or deteriorate themselves. So canned goods should be stored for 1 year and used within that time period. All right. Got another video. I think I already hit that sound button. So this is one on freezing vegetables. I'm going to go ahead and scoot forward. They do some little introduction stuff And I'm going to go about 30 seconds in on it.
Hi, I'm Lynette Gord, Field Specialist in Food Safety with Ohio State University Extension. And today we're going to be putting our food away or processing our food through freezing. And freezing is one of the easiest ways to keep your food longer and save the nutrients in your food. And there's many containers that you can use to do that. Some of them that we have here today and are freezer safe containers are the plastic bags that are freezer quality, or freezer containers that are a nice rigid container, making sure they have a good, solid, well-fitting lid. We can even freeze in our canning jars, making sure that you leave at least an inch headspace for that if you're freezing in the jars. We're going to freeze some green beans today. So the first step in the process is to wash them. Okay, we washed our beans. We're now ready to snap them or cut them. To snap them, you just snap the ends off. And we try to make them into about 1 inch length or bite-sized pieces. If we want to cut them, then we're just going to cut the ends off. And you're going to cut off any bad parts. The next step will be to blanch them. And with vegetables, we need to blanch them to stop the enzyme growth. What happens is the enzymes allow them to continue ripening, and we don't want that to happen. So blanching is basically putting them in hot boiling water for a specified period of time. Or you can steam blanch them, which is what we're going to do today. We have a basket steamer, and then you have to add 1.5 times. So we're going to steam blanch them for 5 minutes. So that'll be our next process. When that time is finished, you're going to immediately plunge them into cold water, or even cold water with a little bit of ice in it. From this point, we could take our beans and put them directly into our freezer-safe containers. But what we're going to do today is show you how to tray freeze. To do that, get a tray and put your beans out in just a single layer on that tray. This will then go into the freezer, and we'll leave it in there for an hour or two until they're just partially frozen. And then we can break them up and put them into the container. That way they're individually quick frozen and they don't clump and ice together in your container. While our beans are in the freezer on the tray, we'll go ahead and fill another container and simply put them in there. We're going to leave a little bit of space at the top, but not a lot. The key is to get the lid on securely, because you don't want the air to be in there. And so one of the things you want to do is what we call burp it. And to do that, you just pick up on the end and push down and get as much air as possible out of there. The other key when you're freezing, don't freeze too much at one time, because you're going to raise the temperature of your freezer. And you want to keep your freezer temperature at 0 degrees. And so have a good thermometer that you can check that. Okay, this one's done. Let's go check on the tray. These are ready to package. And as I said before, these will be individually quick frozen. And so you can take as many out of the container as you want to. They won't be frozen in a clump. Okay, now let's seal it up. Make sure you get that lid on tight, and don't forget to give it that little burp to get rid of that excess air. Make sure that you label it with the contents and date it. Our green beans can last in our freezer as long as your freezer is at 0 degrees, will last 6 to 9 months. For more information on freezing your vegetables, you can go to our website at fcs.osu.edu and click on the Home Food Preservation tab.
All right, now the next thing we have is a short video on just some real basic information about food drying, and then we are done with our presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and play that video.
Drying, one of the oldest methods of food preservation, is gaining in popularity. One of the biggest advantages of drying or dehydrating food is that it removes the water that yeast and bacteria need to grow. If dried properly, foods will not spoil. There are various ways of drying foods, including the sun, conventional oven, or electric dehydrator. Because of high humidity, it is not recommended that we dry food outdoors in Missouri. Oven drying is probably the most convenient method because most people have an oven. It isn't, however, a very energy efficient way to dry foods. It's also difficult to maintain the low temperature needed for drying in a regular oven. Oven-dried foods are more susceptible to scorching and tend to be darker, more brittle, and less flavorful than foods dried in a dehydrator. An electric dehydrator will give you the best, most consistent results. Although the initial investment for an electric dehydrator is fairly high, it does a better job of maintaining the low temperatures needed for drying. Drying removes the moisture from the food so that bacteria, yeast, and molds cannot grow and spoil the food. It also slows down the action of the enzymes but does not inactivate them. Because drying removes moisture, the food becomes smaller and lighter in weight. Some foods, such as jerky, fruit leathers, or dried fruits, can be eaten dry. Other foods, like vegetables, may have to have the water added back when ready for use. The optimum temperature for drying food is 140 degrees Fahrenheit. If higher temperatures are used, the food will cook instead of drying. When the food cooks on the outside and the moisture cannot escape, case hardening can occur. The food will eventually mold. Thus, the drying process should never be hurried by raising the drying temperature. Low humidity aids the drying process. Food contains a lot of water. To dry food, the water must move from the food to the surrounding air. If the surrounding air is humid, then drying will be slowed down. Drying times will depend on the type and amount of food, the moisture content, as well as the room temperature and humidity. Some foods will take only a few hours, while others may require days of drying time. If you're going to attempt oven drying, start by using an oven thermometer to test the oven temperature at its lowest setting. If it cannot maintain a temperature below 200 degrees, then it's too hot for drying food and you'll need to choose another drying method. Place food in a single layer on a tray that is narrower than the inside of the oven. This will allow air circulation. Only use the bottom heating element, never the upper broiler element. Also, prop the door open at least 4 inches. For an electric dehydrator, different foods with similar drying times and temperatures can be dried together. If you're drying vegetables that have a strong odor like garlic, it's best to dry them separately. Determining when food is dry will take some experience. Err on the side of caution by over drying rather than under drying.
All right, well, now it's question time. I'm going to unshare and see if anybody has any questions with given so much information. You can type something into the chat and we'll read it from there, or you can kind of put your video on and just ask me directly.
Hey, Lauren, I also wanted to share your contact information for anybody who wanted to reach back out, or if they're in another county, you can contact your county's extension office. So there's her information. Also wanted to say before we open it up for questions, that I'm going to, in the chat box, post a link for a survey. If you guys wouldn't mind to, if I can get this to copy, take the survey, let us know, what you thought of the presentation, any topics you might like to see in the future, or any comments. Let's see. Okay, and then Lauren, can you see the chat box for
Yeah.
questions?
Sure. Okay. Yep. Okay. Let's see. What kinds of publications are available at the extension offices for canning? We have a variety of available publications. They would be handouts and so forth on most of the major fruits and vegetables, most popular things. But you would also be, able to look at those websites and see if any of that. But if you wanted me to print something out, just send me an email and I can print it out and get it to you. And if you're not in my counties, that's okay. Just send me an email anyway. I won't send you to somebody else just to get something mailed to you. There will be a limit to how much. If it's a lot of information that you're looking for, then I would have to probably say check with the website and I'll send you certain things. But, I just can't print out the whole book. Let me see. What would you suggest to get as a pressure canner for someone who has never had one? Really, I personally really like the gauge canners because that whole nervous side of me, at this point, I'm not really nervous about canning, but when I started, I was very nervous about that idea that you could blow them up or whatever. And the gauge canners, I really recommend. They're really, most of the major brands, All American is that kind of old school, very fancy one. Presto makes a great one. And you can get a canner for about $50 to $60. So any of the ones, and I would just say check the reviews and see what they said. But Presto would be kind of a major, that's what I have is a Presto. And they would be a major brand that's really pretty readily available. The other thing I wanted to mention, they said that the food dehydrators were very expensive. They have them. I know Walmart sells a dehydrator that's of good quality for about $35. So they've come down a lot in price. Eric says, is there certain produce that you prefer to freeze rather than can, and ones that you prefer to can rather than freeze? So I will tell you, me personally, I'm much more of a freezer than I am a canner. I definitely prefer all fruits frozen. I think it's very easy. You don't have to even blanch those. The tray method works really great. And then you throw them in a baggie and you've got them ready to go. So I personally definitely for fruits, but if you want to make things with them, jams and jellies, people like canned peaches and things like that. It really is more of a personal preference than it is it's whatever you would prefer. Canned tomatoes, I really like having canned tomatoes around. Then I don't have to buy them. They're on the shelf. I know where they came from. And I can choose the recipes that we like the most, and they're just great for soups and sauces and kind of something really quick to go. The other thing that I can a lot of, and a friend of mine kind of asked me to teach her how to do it, and then I started doing it. I thought it was a great idea. I'm now doing a lot of my own chicken broth. We'll cook a chicken, and then I'll go ahead and make a broth out of that with the bones and the fruits and veggies, or not the fruits, but the vegetables, the onions, that kind of thing. Cook that in, and then make my own broth and have it on the shelf, which I really appreciate. That's better than freezing for me because you don't have to thaw it out. So, are there any other questions I can help anyone with? And if any follow-up questions to what I did answer.
I have a question, and that it probably pertains more to the West Virginia Department of Agriculture folks. If I'm canning or preserving from my home kitchen, how do I sell to direct to consumer, and are there any label requirements for that?
This is Kacey with the Department of Agriculture.
Okay.
You can contact any of the three of us planning coordinators, and we can help you with that. We do a label review. If it's non-potentially hazardous, that is voluntary. If it's potentially hazardous, you will have to get a label review. We can walk you through process authority and things like that for potentially hazardous and non-potentially hazardous. It's really simple, no registrations, and we can definitely help you with that.
Thank you.
Yep, there've been, I used to know that information, but they updated it in the last couple of years for sure. So I'm sorry if I shared anything that was inaccurate in any way. So.
Yeah, this is Lacey. I'll just add one thing I think is really exciting. Can you guys hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so prior to a couple of years ago, you couldn't sell a lot of foods at a farmer's market, but you can now. We have new farmer's market regulations that actually, if you go through the process of what we call getting a farmer's market vendor permit, it's a pretty straightforward application. Again, like Kacey said, any of us can help you. You can sell things that are considered potentially hazardous. You just have to fill out an application. They do a home kitchen inspection and help you ensure that you have some food safety training. But it's a great opportunity because before, if someone was selling some of these things at a farmer's market, it was illegal. Now it's legal, and a huge opportunity for diversifying your business. If you're just selling, accustomed to selling raw, uncut produce, now you can preserve and add value to some of that and sell it. So I'll just make a plug for, what Kacey said. I think it's a great opportunity to sell at farmers markets, and people are shopping at farmers markets now more than ever before. So reach out to us if you have any questions. We're super happy to help you guys.
Thank you. Very helpful.
I'm very glad you all chimed in. Like I said, I knew they'd changed, but I wasn't sure about the most updated information. So I just wanted to try to answer some of that information. So good. Any other questions? Let me see. Can I get a food handler's permit in a webinar these days? That's probably one that Department of Ag folks, you would know more than I do. I am not.
You can take it online. The statewide food handlers card is available online through DHHR.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? All right, well, I guess we can go ahead and wrap it up. So don't forget to join us next Tuesday. It's going to be on small fruit production at 6 o'clock again.
And thank you all for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Lauren.